Good evening. My name is Adrian Gomez, and I'll be your MC for the Hope Out of Horror Seeking Refuge in Australia webinar this evening. I'm a deacon of the Catholic Diocese of Broken Bay, a youth ministry coordinator in a high school, a husband and father to two teenage children. Welcome. It's wonderful to have so many of you joining us this evening for this important look at the situation of refugees and asylum seekers in Australia. We've had over 300 register for tonight, a fantastic number, and it's great to see the interest and support for refugees. In the chat, let's just take a moment to greet one another, maybe saying where you're from and, if you wish, the Indigenous land you're joining us from. You may have to change the setting on the chat setting to message everyone. I've just put a little example there. Welcome everyone. I'm Adrian on the traditional lands of the Gringai people in Asquith, New South Wales. Just while people are doing that, a reminder that the chat is a public space. Please be respectful and stay on topic. There are many important issues that need to be discussed, but for this hour, our focus is on refugees and people seeking asylum. And it's wonderful just to see all the names just scrolling up there and the different places that we're gathered from. A lot from around Sydney and New South Wales, and welcome everybody. It is great to see you all here. And so as we gather, we acknowledge the Gringai, Darug, Eora, and all the other traditional custodians of the lands from which we meet. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, the keepers of the dreaming who have handed on their ancient culture and traditions, who remind us that the land does not belong to us, rather we belong to the land. May we walk gently on this land. Our original title for the webinar tonight was Stories of Hope and Courage. However, following the heartbreaking events in Afghanistan, the title was changed to Hope Out of Horror, Seeking Refuge in Australia. There is so much tragedy in leaving a country to seek refuge, and yet when arriving in Australia, people seeking asylum are sadly often not met with compassion and support by our government. This webinar will give you an insight into what those seeking asylum in our communities face. It will share what policy changes would make a big difference, and hopefully you will leave tonight's webinar knowing that there is hope if we all unite and take action. People seeking asylum are courageous and bring with them a wealth of knowledge, skills and life experience to build our communities and help them to thrive. And we're going to hear from some of them tonight. Just to say at the start, this webinar came about through the collaboration of organisations who are invested on the ground in the refugee space. Jesuit Refugee Service Australia, the St Vincent de Paul Society New South Wales, and SJAB around the Bay, a Catholic network of parish social justice groups from the Diocese of Broken Bay. This Sunday, the Church celebrates Migrant and Refugee Sunday, so this is a good moment to be learning and committing ourselves to making a difference in this area. As we begin, we might pause for a moment of recollection as we focus our thoughts and hopes for all refugees and people seeking asylum. For those of you who are religious, you may join me in prayer, while others may have a moment of silent reflection. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, we pray for the world's refugees. They have experienced trauma beyond our imagining. God of healing, bring them healing. They endure the most trying of circumstances. God of strength, bring them strength. They face an uncertain future. God of hope, bring them hope. We pray for the countries which refugees come, especially Afghanistan at this time. They are experiencing conflict. God of peace, bring them peace. Their people are torn apart by violence and other types of persecution. God of healing, bring them healing. They face a difficult future. God of hope, bring them hope. We pray too for our nation Australia. We have hardened our hearts against refugees. God of love, bring us love. We have grown weary of caring. God of compassion, give us compassion. We need to find a better way forward. God of hope, bring us hope. And we make all our prayers in Jesus' name. Amen. Whatever our background, we gather as people of hope. While fear paralyzes, hope opens new horizons and change comes out of hope. In this time of social distancing and lockdown, it's so important that we can continue to connect with others. And our hope is that by hearing some of these sharings and stories, you will feel connected to this important movement and be inspired to work for compassion and change in our community. Our webinar today has three main focuses or asks. We hope to touch both your hearts and your minds in a way that leads you to take concrete action, as these are three practical things we can do to make a difference for refugees and asylum seekers. Here to say more about the three asks is Sarah, who is the Policy and Advocacy Officer at the St. Vincent de Paul Society. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Adrian. I'm thankful to be here this evening, and I'm really overwhelmed by the number of people who have registered and are watching this evening. As Adrian mentioned, we have three key asks from tonight's webinar. These three key asks are aligned with the 150 Days of Action campaign, which I'm sure many of you here tonight are very well aware of. My role is to try and give you a very brief overview of the impacts that government policy has related to these three asks. As many of you are aware, policy changes impacting refugees and people seeking asylum happen often in Australia, and they change regularly, and it can be hard to keep up. I'll do my best to outline some of the complexities of these policy impacts in as simple of a way as possible. So I ask you to be patient with me, and hopefully it's clear enough and simple enough for you all to understand. So the first of these three key asks is offering permanent protection to all people seeking asylum. Those who arrived in Australia by boat in more recent years, as many of you know, have effectively been denied access to permanent protection in Australia. A group of approximately 30,000 people who arrived in Australia between the 13th of August 2012 and the 1st of January 2014 were labelled as the legacy caseload, which I'm sure some of you are aware of as well. People within this legacy caseload have essentially been denied the right to permanent protection and instead have been offered the choice between two temporary protection visas. The first of these is called a temporary protection visa, or TPV, as an abbreviation. There's lots of abbreviations in this world, or Safe Haven Enterprise Visa, also known as SJAB. That's the second temporary protection visa. For people within this legacy caseload, pathways to permanent visas are incredibly difficult to almost impossible to obtain. While those on SJABs, the Safe Haven Enterprise visas, may eventually be able to meet requirements for alternate permanent visas, such as a skilled migrant visa, the language and documentary requirements are significant and waiting periods are long. Applying for a skilled visa also forces refugees to make the incredibly difficult decision to forego their refugee status without any certainty that they'll be granted a permanent visa. Temporary protection visa and Safe Haven Enterprise visa holders face several unique challenges that refugees on permanent protection visas do not. Just some of these, and there's a plethora of them, but some of them that I'll list tonight include temporary protection visa holders must pay international student fees to enrol in higher education courses. They have restrictions on overseas travel. They face the ongoing uncertainty of being returned to potential situations of persecution or significant harm at any time. And people on SJAB visas, or the Safe Haven Enterprise visas, who have physical or mental disability are less able to meet work or study requirements of the visa. As of July 2021, approximately 23% of all finalised visa grants for people within this legacy caseload were from Afghanistan. Of those who were on hand or at review stages of their applications, 11.1% were from Afghanistan. Most applications as of July 2021 were for safe haven enterprise visas, approximately almost 19,000 applications, and approximately 8,488 temporary protection visa applications. Why, given circumstances in Afghanistan, are we still requiring refugees from Afghanistan to prove their need for protection every 3 to 5 years? And why are we denying them the right to permanent protection? The need is evident. The second key ask is in relation to a financial safety net for people seeking asylum. People seeking asylum do not have access to Australia's social security system. However, they may be eligible, emphasis on the may, be eligible, to the Status Resolution Support Services, also known as SRSS. There's another abbreviation for you. Less than 5% of the total number of people seeking asylum in the Australian community are receiving assistance through the SRSS program. And there are a number of reasons why that number is so low. The SRSS program provides what's called a needs-based temporary support while people's claims for protection are being assessed or while they're making plans to depart Australia. The program provides a basic financial payment that's approximately 89% of the job seeker payment and may also include access to casework support, torture and trauma counselling, and access to subsidised medication. The Department of Home Affairs has ultimate decision-making powers as to whether someone is granted access to the SRSS program. And for those who are rejected or unable to get access, there's no means to appeal these decisions at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal or by the courts. Access to the SRSS program has grown increasingly difficult due to the tightening of eligibility criteria. For example, since mid-2018, people who have the right to work are no longer eligible for the SRSS program, even if they're unemployed and do not have income. As most people who are lodging new claims seeking asylum are receiving work rights, they're excluded from the SRSS program. If someone is unable to work, they must still meet a range of eligibility criteria to prove this. For example, that might be anything from physical or mental health barriers to being a single parent of a preschool-aged child, a primary carer, or being aged 70 or over. In some exceptional circumstances, someone who's experiencing a major crisis may also be eligible. For example, family violence, domestic and family violence, or a house fire, or something else like that. But assessment of this eligibility is done on a case-by-case basis and varies. It's very subjective. If you have been rejected at the review stage of seeking asylum, you're generally ineligible to access the SRSS program. Like many others in Australia, the pandemic has meant that many people seeking asylum have lost their jobs or had hours slashed, impacting on their ability to pay rent or cover their general living expenses. They were originally excluded as well from the federal government pandemic relief packages, and access to SRSS did not change or improve. And then the final ask is in relation to enabling access to family reunion for people seeking asylum. Australia's policies towards refugees and people seeking asylum intentionally prolong family separation, particularly for those who have attempted or successfully arrived in Australia without a valid visa. This unfortunately also includes unaccompanied minors. Temporary protection visa and safe haven enterprise visa holders are denied the right to family reunion under the refugee and humanitarian program, and they're unable to sponsor under the family stream or under Australia's overall migration program. This is in addition to visa condition, and I'm saying numbers here, but visa condition 8570 that limits travel outside of Australia for TPV and SJAB visa holders, making it difficult for refugees to reunite with family, even temporarily in third countries. We are keeping families apart. For refugees from Afghanistan who are on temporary visas, this essentially denies them of any chance to evacuate their families and bring them to safety in Australia. It also prevents them from being able to leave Australia to meet their families in a third country. Even those who arrived without valid visas before the 13th of August 2012 are given the lowest priority for family reunion under Australia's humanitarian program, or the family stream of the overall migration program. For those who are yet to receive temporary or permanent protection, they're also denied the right to family reunion while their claims for protection are being assessed and determined. Significant delays in the regular and refugee status determination processes in Australia have prolonged the length of time that individuals have been separated from their family members. Now, I'm sure many of you would be able to start to imagine some of the impacts that this has. Prolonged family separation has a range of negative impacts, from physical and mental health to an individual's ability to integrate in Australia, all the way through to relationship dynamics within families as well. We're asking that the Australian government should provide access and eligibility to family reunion pathways for all refugees, regardless of their mode of arrival or visa status upon arrival. So that's a bit of an overview of very, very complex policy issues related to those three key asks, but I hope that it provides some context for the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. You have covered a lot of complex information, but it is really important material, and to do it so thoroughly in such a short time. So thank you for doing that. Now, for everyone else, because there was so much there, during this webinar, we will be further unpacking these three asks that Sarah's just talked about. We're now going to hear messages from some special guests. Some weren't able to join us live, but have sent in messages for us tonight. Julian Burnside, Order of Australia, QC, is a well-known human rights lawyer, and for many years has been at the forefront of activism and advocacy for those seeking refuge in our country. August, just last month, marks 20 years since the Tampa incident, which has cast a long shadow over Australian refugee policy, and Julian will reflect on the impact of that tonight. We also have a message from the Very Reverend Dr. David Ranson, Vicar General of the Diocese of Broken Bay, formerly a Cistercian monk, writer and lecturer in the areas of spirituality and theology in action. We've also invited some students from St. Leo's Vinnies School Conference and young adults from the Asquith Vinnies Youth Conference to share their own voices on the issues that Sarah's raised, and it is great to hear young people so passionate about that. So I might hand over now to the young people and to Julian and Father David.
As a young person in Australia, I have the privilege of hearing news secondhand and not being subject to it firsthand. Whilst I am by no means an expert on the crisis in Afghanistan nor refugees, I do know a few things. Firstly, Australia needs to end temporary protection visas, which leave active members of Australian society in a both undeserved and unfair limbo.
Refugees and asylum seekers are not being treated the right way. They need to be treated much, much better. Try and think about it from their point of view. Being split apart from your families, having to leave some place because, for no fault of yours, it has become unsafe and no longer secure, to find a new place to consider and call home that is secure and safe. Is it fair? It's not fair. No one deserves that, especially these refugees and asylum seekers.
For as long as I've been alive, I can remember seeing news stories about refugees. The notion that there are so many human beings out there, untethered from all they know, usually without access to basic necessities, and being turned away by the very people they hoped would help them, fills me with a crushing sense of guilt and sorrow. I can't imagine what it would feel like to have to flee my home. I can't imagine what it would feel like to finally reach a safe place, only to be saddled with a temporary protection visa that throws your entire future into uncertainty.
I believe that kindness shouldn't stop at the temporary protection from danger. It should extend past basic human rights and include facilitating all people to flourish emotionally, mentally, physically, and spiritually. This is especially true for refugees who have not been bestowed this kindness in their home countries and have come to Australia with hopes for the future, only to encounter further man-made hardships.
The Tampa was a Norwegian cargo ship. It rescued, at the request of the Australian government, it rescued about 400 Hazaras fleeing Afghanistan. The great good fortune that John Howard had was that he set up the Tampa episode as an attempt to get some votes from the Pauline Hanson set. But the trial judgment in Tampa was handed down in Melbourne at 2:15 in the afternoon, Melbourne time, on the 11th of September 2001. And a matter of hours later, the terror attack on America happened. Since then, both Liberal and Labor have lied to us by calling refugees who come here as boat people illegal. They do not break any law. And by mistreating them dreadfully, they are put into detention, sometimes for years on end, and we just need to behave better. This is a very, very big country. We can manage to get great good fortune from refugees who come here looking for a place to live. Furthermore, we have to be very careful in our attitude to the Hazara presently in Afghanistan. We have to be very careful that we don't damage the mental health of Hazara refugees who are living in Australia, because if we do, we are damaging this country and its future, as well as damaging the people who've come here looking for protection from the kind of persecution that the Taliban are notorious for.
For any of us who have not been in the situation, it's almost impossible to imagine the context of those who come to our shores seeking asylum. Traumatised, dislocated, lost, confused. Those seeking asylum in Australia are amongst the poorest in our society. It would be an enormous failing if we had to add the word abandoned to the list of words describing their situation. Let us do everything to ensure that those who have sought asylum with us are offered a permanent home with the legal protection they require, along with access to medical and financial assistance. Let us not respond with indifference.
Now, I personally became involved with advocacy for refugees through my sister Claire. Claire doesn't belong to any organisation, but simply made friends with some of the refugees detained on Manus Island through social media. When some of them were brought to the Mantra, then Park hotels in Melbourne for detention, Claire went down to Melbourne to visit them, and she actually stayed there and joined in the daily protests outside with other supporters to show them that they had friends in the community who cared. Claire was a consultant for a documentary called Freedom is Beautiful about two of her friends, Moz and Farhad, who were released from the Park Hotel on temporary protection visas in January this year. This documentary by Hamish MacDonald will be released in November, so I'm just going to show you a teaser trailer in a moment, followed by a Zoom conversation I had with Claire and one of her friends, Ishmael, who is still locked up in detention in the Park Hotel in Melbourne.
یه داریشون بود که ما میاد بازم اولش شروع بودم شروع بکنم بچو توی My name is Farhad Bandesh. I'm a Kurdish refugee. 7.5 years of my life, I lost it for no reason. Fortunately, with lots of support from Australian people, I got my freedom on my birthday. What was the name of it? No.
My name is Mustafa Azimi Tabar. I am 34 years old. I am a Kurdish refugee. I was in prison more than 2,700 days by the Australian government. But my message to you, wonderful people, is love. And I believe that love is the answer. This is the way that we can kill the monsters.
very bad situation. How are you, buddy?
Good. I'm really happy to see you. You're still strong. I like it.
I'm trying, bro. I'm still trying.
Yes.
But it's hard. Very hard time. Go hard, bro. It is hard. I don't know what is my crime.
You didn't do anything wrong. You're just looking for safety and your freedom. You are a good man.
That is problem. Because I'm good man. Everyone bully me. I will not give up.
That's what we need from you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you so much, bro, speaking. Appreciate all of your time. You are too kind, all of you. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Be strong.
Appreciate, bro.
I love you, bro. I need you have the biggest smile. Always. Yes, that's the face. That's the resistance. That's the way you fight for your freedom.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You too, brother. Take care.
Have a good night. See ya.
Love you. Thank you for your time, all of you.
Love you. See ya.
And once again, we thank Ishmael for so generously giving his time and sharing his story. The stories of Moz, Farhad and Ishmael are just a tiny representation of the broad spectrum of refugee experiences in Australia. People who came to Australia as refugees have already contributed so much to our community in so many ways. We call upon the government to end the anxiety and the uncertainty of temporary visas and allow recognised refugees in Australia to have permanent residence here. Our second ask concerns offering a safety net, including medical and financial assistance to those refugees and asylum seekers already living in our community. I'll hand over again to the young people to share this second ask.
Secondly, Australia needs to remove barriers to family reunions, which have left children separated from their parents. Family is everything and shouldn't be another thing taken away.
These people, they need to see their families. Imagine being stranded, not able to see your families, them being in a country while you're being stuck, trying to get into that country. Think about that. It's not fair. It doesn't matter who you are. Refugees and asylum seekers need to be able to connect with their family.
It can't be imagined how it must feel, how haunting it must feel, to know that even though you're safe, your family, the families of these refugees, this includes their children oftentimes, remain in what is often mortal danger. You may never see them again.
The cruel and inhumane treatment of those seeking asylum is inexcusable, and we must exhort change in these policies. Less than 5% of people seeking asylum are receiving assistance through the SRSS program, a program with which provides a needs-based temporary support for individuals. The government has introduced policy changes to restrict the eligibility criteria, making it more difficult to apply for and receive assistance. This is unconscionable, as we have a legal obligation to help those seeking asylum and ensuring that they are being cared for during this transition. It's time to fix these policies in order to reflect a more welcoming and caring stance for vulnerable people.
I now invite Zaki from Jesuit Refugee Services to share on the reality of what not having a safety net means for people seeking asylum in our community. Zaki Hadari is a 2020 Australian Human Rights Commission Human Rights Hero. He works at, as I said, at Jesuit Refugee Services as a leadership coordinator and employment support worker, assisting refugees and people seeking asylum to find work. He is a highly respected community leader and advocate. Zaki is himself a refugee. He fled Afghanistan after being targeted to be killed by the Taliban. He survived a terrifying boat journey and arrived in Australia seeking asylum in 2012. Since then, despite social, legal, and financial obstacles, he has thrived. First, he learned English. Then he transformed into a human rights advocate, courageously sharing his experience with schools and the wider community, speaking out about the cruel regime of permanent temporariness faced by people like him who came by boat seeking safety. Welcome, Zaki.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here tonight. It's always a pleasure to see so many people are coming and listening to us, but also at the same time, it's very painful for me to know that people that arrived in Australia at the same time that I arrived are still in detention center or still detained. It pains me to see people like Ismail that are still in a prison, that they can't have a normal life that a normal human being deserves. And I still feel privileged that I'm in a community and I'm living with some sort of freedom. I am a Hazara refugee from Afghanistan. I escaped the Taliban that control my country today. And I still have my family in Kabul trapped. They cannot go anywhere to seek safety. The borders are closed. Refugees from Afghanistan are not allowed to cross the borders to another country for safety. It pains me to see my family and so many other families that are trapped in Kabul having their family members in Australia, and we feel hopeless that we can't help them in any way. It's hard for us to be here physically, but mentally we keep worrying about our families and loved ones that are still in Kabul under the Taliban regime, especially for the Hazara people. We have been persecuted by this regime for many, many years, and the genocide is still going on, given that they're controlling the country. But tonight I'm speaking about the safety net of people seeking asylum and refugees that are in Australia. Australia has had and still have a very harsh policy towards people arriving in our shore seeking asylum by boat. And I'm one of them. I'm on a temporary visa. My visa runs out in the next few days. And I have to reprove that I'm a refugee. I cannot go back to Afghanistan to get another temporary visa. And that will allow me to stay in Australia for another 5 years. That's just one of the reality that people live in a temporary world. Everything is temporary and you have to reprove yourself again that you're a refugee, you cannot go back to your country. But the hard thing for refugees on temporary visas are that we cannot get, it's hard to get a permanent employment because you're constantly worrying about your visa running out and what will be next for you. For an employer, it will be hard to know if you can stay in Australia after your visa runs out. So there's challenges. But beyond people that have visas for 3 years or 5 years, there are people that don't have those visas. They are only on a bridging visa because Australia denied their protection for asylum, even people from Afghanistan. And most of them don't have work rights, don't have access to Medicare. So these people are forced to live in our community with no basic human rights. In a way, they're pushed to go back to their country like Afghanistan, country that is controlled by the Taliban. And they're punished in a way to live in our society with no access to safety nets, no work rights, no access to Medicare, in a way to be punished to go back home, not stay in Australia. That's one of the reasons that people are pushed to this situation in a way to sort of give them a message that you're not welcome in Australia, even if you're a refugee from Afghanistan. We don't accept you because you came here on a boat. And also there are many other barriers, even for people that do have work rights, do have visas. For example, when I arrived in Australia, we weren't allowed to go to TAFE to learn English for 3 years. We weren't allowed to work for 3 years. And that created the barriers for people to gain qualification that they need, to learn the language, English. So in a way they can find employment, or they can find their ways to get around. Again, it's another policy that were in place, put us on a bridging visas for 3 years with no work rights and no access to formal education. People like myself are going through a lot of challenges. We do have work rights. You'll be very lucky if you work in a workplace that understands the situation. But often people don't, because refugees that are coming here, they have challenges. They don't have the right language skill, the right qualification that people need in here, but also more importantly, the mental health of them, that they still have their families, their wives, their kids that are living in Afghanistan or in other war-torn country. So they keep worrying for them. Their mental health is not in a great condition, especially being away from them for almost 9 years, and some people for 10 years. And the situation is still uncertain for us. Still, we cannot bring our family here. So it's painful, as Sarah was saying, to be here and not being able to sponsor your family to come to live with you in a peaceful country, but also to know that you cannot go and you cannot rescue them. So that's a big challenge for a lot of people to don't have the safety net. And also Australian government assuming that a lot of the people seeking asylum are receiving SRSS, but that's not true. There's 105,000 people seeking asylum in Australia. And out of those, only 3,000 people are getting SRSS support. And the government is assuming that people that don't have work, they're receiving some sort of support, and that's not true. So we're asking for the Australian government to do provide a permanent protection for refugees who've been here for the last 9 to 10 years. They have nowhere to go. They have no safe place to call home. And it's powerful to see our young generation coming on here tonight and asking the Australian government to provide permanent protection. And that will bring safety to a lot of people seeking asylum. Thank you for your time. And thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you, Zaki. And thank you for all the amazing work you're doing and all the important information you gave us tonight. I will just say you came and spoke at our school probably about 4 years ago with Phil Glendenning. And I know the young people who've been giving messages, they were in about year 8 when you came and spoke. So obviously your message touched them and they've continued that, it's awoken in them that passion for making a difference with refugees and asylum seekers. So thank you, Zaki. Our third ask now is to enable access to family reunions for refugees. Again, we have messages from special guests who both of whom came to Australia as refugees themselves. Adama Kamara is the Deputy CEO for the Refugee Council of Australia. Born in Sierra Leone, she and her family were in Australia for her father's university study when civil war broke out in her home country. Unable to return, the family sought asylum and then became involved in sponsoring and supporting refugees displaced by the Civil War to settle in Australia. Prior to taking up her present position, Adama spent 15 years working in advocacy and resettlement programs for young refugees fleeing her home country in trauma. Vincent Long, the Catholic Bishop of Parramatta, fled Vietnam on a refugee boat in 1979 and reached Malaysia, where he spent 16 months in a refugee camp where he learned to speak English. He reached Australia in 1980 and became a Franciscan friar in 1984. He was appointed Australia's first Asian-born bishop in 2011. They'll be followed by the young people again, who will remind us of our third ask.
My name is Adama Kamara. I am the Deputy CEO of the Refugee Council of Australia. Family reunion is often the only way that refugees in Australia can ensure their family members living in countries of origin are safe. For people who have arrived by boat, the applications for family members are the lowest processing priority, meaning they'll never be processed. The only exception is if people get Australian citizenship. However, processing of citizenship applications of people who came by boat are being stalled. This is cruel and unnecessary. Refugee Council has 4 main recommendations for family reunion. Number 1, develop a humanitarian family reunion program. Number 2, remove restrictions on family reunion for those who come by boat. Number 3, restore funding for migration advice. Number 4, enhance access to family reunion by waiving application fees for refugees sponsoring family members, have greater flexibility for documentation requirements, prioritise processing of family members in immediate risk, and ensuring access to settlement services on arrival. Family is a fundamental unit in our society, and these 4 recommendations will mean people have access to the social and emotional support family members provide.
Dear sisters and brothers, Australia has a long tradition of generously resettling refugees and displaced persons. We have risen to the challenge at almost every global humanitarian crisis. Whether it was the World War II in Europe or the boat people phenomenon in Southeast Asia, Australians show their best nature by their welcome and hospitality. I also was a refugee once and fled Vietnam by boat. My family was welcomed into Australia. It is our collective duty as Christians and as a society to foster and uphold the unity of the family. This includes enabling access to family reunions for refugees and diaspora communities in Australia. They should be able to bring their families to our shores and reunite in safety. It is when people have meaningful and supportive networks of family and community that they flourish and make Australia a better place.
Thirdly, need to offer a permanent home along with medical and financial assistance to those seeking refuge and asylum. Australia has opened its arms to people struggling before and needs to take the opportunity to do so again, to help people who have lost their homes and have nowhere left to turn. As a nation, we have a responsibility to these people and to support them, especially those who supported us against the Taliban.
We are all human beings and we all deserve the same human rights to feel loved, to be connected in a community, to feel safe, to be safe and secure.
Our resources can be shared with those who need them more than us.
I can't imagine what it would feel like to be separated from my loved ones, the only people I have left in the world, and sent to a place that is unknown. I can't imagine what it would feel like to be left without assistance in a country I know nothing about. Unfortunately, there are people here who don't have to imagine. That's why we need to end temporary protection visas, remove barriers to family reunions, and offer a permanent home along with medical and financial assistance to those seeking refuge and asylum.
Australia needs to change its act. We're a huge country with more than enough for everyone. People who lose everything just to get here deserve justice. If our land truly is abound in nature's gifts as we say it is, then offer permanent dwelling, offer medical aid, offer financial assistance. In time, these people will repay with gratitude. For those who come across the seas, with boundless plains to share, with courage, let us all combine to advance Australia fair.
I do love the passion and the idealism of youth. They give me such hope. Just going to put a quote up on the screen quickly. All people fleeing persecution have a right to seek asylum. It is legal to do so, and the Australian government has both a legal and moral duty to care for asylum seekers, especially children. Now, these words were said by Sister Jan Barnett, coordinator of the Josephite Justice Network, at the time of her arrest at a prayer vigil in 2014 at the North Sydney office of the then Treasurer Joe Hockey. When a country starts arresting praying nuns, it's time to start asking hard questions. Sister Jan has been the driving force between the 150 Days of Action campaign, which was launched on May the 1st, and which will culminate on Migrant and Refugee Sunday, September 26th, this Sunday. We asked Sister Jan, given the difficulties presented by the pandemic, how has the response been to the 150 Days of Action campaign?
Thanks, Adrian. I do have to tell you, I've been really inspired by the response right across Australia, in spite of all the COVID restrictions. People of all ages, from all walks of life and all parts of the country, have engaged solidly with the 150 Days of Action. Signing the petition, sending letters, phoning politicians, meeting face-to-face, and even in some cases, organising Zoom meetings. Young people have created videos and interviews that have found their way into homes, schools and churches. And every politician has been contacted and urged to speak in the party room and the parliament. And motivated people, like all of us here tonight, are holding webinars to help create new paths. It is saying something really significant about us, I believe. I'm truly convinced that many Australians are increasingly disturbed by what they see we have become as a nation. And we witnessed this, didn't we, in the Australians' response to the horrors of Afghanistan and the treatment of Afghani refugees here. We're longing for a more just, compassionate and honest government and country. And the fact that Pope Francis has come out so strongly in naming this year as the year of Joseph, himself a refugee, has tapped into this. But please, everyone, the negative response of government should be a real incentive to all of us to do more and to do it urgently. So please, sign the petition. Get your family and at least 5 friends to sign it. The link is in the chat and as well will be sent to you tomorrow. Write to your MP. A sample letter will be in the mail, or should I say email. Organise a face-to-face or Zoom meeting with your politicians. The agenda for that is also in the mail. And finally, please join us for a 30-minute candlelight prayer vigil over Zoom on Sunday night at 7 o'clock for Migrant and Refugee Sunday, where we'll continue to grieve for the suffering of refugees and those seeking our protection. A ceremony will be recorded and a video will be sent to every senator and MP in the federal parliament with all of our images on it. So our demands remain. We want permanent protection for all refugees. We want access to family reunions, and we demand a safety net, including medical and financial assistance to those in need. Thanks so much. Thanks, Adrian, and to everyone for tonight. As we go forward, let's take with us the words of the Black American activist John Lewis. We will find a way to make a way out of no way. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you, Sister Jan, for your leadership and vision in this area and for the incredible work that you continue to do, as well as the challenges that you've laid out for us tonight in order to move forward together. To build on these challenges and give us some practical ways forward, I now invite Zoe, who is a community organiser at Jesuit Refugee Services, to share a little bit more about these.
Hi everyone, so great to see so much support tonight. Thank you for being here. So we've heard all the important issues that have come up. We've heard really heartening personal stories, and now we want you to join us in taking action to bring hope to what we've heard tonight. So as you'll see, we've got some slides now to share these. The first action being to sign petitions. There are quite a few petitions around, and it's really important that we do get behind these, especially for Action for Afghanistan, we're actually going to be bringing them all together. As you can see on the screen, one of them has 150,000 people who have signed it, and we're hoping to get it to 200,000. When this happens, that's when politicians really listen. It's also so heartening to see the support in the chat with so many saying that they'll write to their MPs. Yes, please do. But also join us in taking action in a bigger group. Join in Action for Afghanistan MP delegation in your electorate. Afghanistan was taken by the Taliban just a month ago. It's so important that we take action now. We are meeting with key Liberal MPs across Sydney and Australia to share these important asks for our brothers and sisters facing persecution in Afghanistan and for those seeking asylum in our communities here in Australia. Please join us in calling for our government to choose compassion. You can also connect with the different groups in your area, including the ones that are put on the webinar tonight. This includes Social Justice Around the Bay, Jesuit Refugee Service, and your local Vinnies conference. You can also support people seeking asylum in your community in a really practical way. At JRS, we have a food bank that feeds 950 people a week. Before COVID happened, we were feeding 200 people a week. As you can see from what Zaki really talked about tonight, that safety net wasn't there. People didn't have access to Job Seeker or JobKeeper, and the numbers keep growing. We really need your support. You can also support us through our JRS employment program. We match employers and employees, and it's a benefit for all parties. Tomorrow, I'll be sending an email with all these lists of actions, including how you can support the employment program. Would love for you to join. There's a few different upcoming events coming up. This is a great week for Migrant and Refugee Sunday. We've got the Sharing Our Stories and Showcasing Our Successes webinar coming up, the Call to Lamentation that Sister Jan shared about coming up on Sunday night, and a Catholic Alliance for People Seeking Asylum webinar happening on Tuesday as well. And we've got a bunch of resources. Tonight really is just an overview. It is such a deep issue, and we want you to learn more about it with us. So Vinnies and JRS, including Sarah, helped put together a great number of resources on these complex issues that we'd love for you to read and share with others. The 150 Days of Action campaign also has a wonderful page of resources. As mentioned, we'll be sharing all these in an email today. Please join us in taking action and calling on compassion. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Adrian for being our host tonight. He has been fantastic in pulling all this together. And Adrian, it's been such a pleasure to work with you and to see your commitment, your passion for justice, and the way that you connect with your students and the community to make this happen. So thank you, Adrian, for being such a wonderful host. I'll now give it back to you.
Thanks, Zoe, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege. It really has. I am conscious of the time, and it is time to wrap up. But if you do have a moment, we'd love you, after everything you've heard tonight, if there are any things that stood out for you, or touched you, you might just mention that in the chat. But even more importantly than that, I'd love you, if there's an action that you could commit to, one of the things that you've heard, maybe an action that you could commit to take, we'd love you to put that in the chat as well, and just share those ideas for your own personal actions with the others in our community we've gathered here virtually tonight. And so thank you to everyone for joining us tonight, but a special thanks especially to the people behind the scenes who made this event possible. So Zoe, Zaki, Sarah, we've all been up front, but behind the scenes have been Bill and Carmel Aitken, Leo Ward and Colin McKenna and Phil Jones from SJ Around the Bay, who were really the driving force behind having a refugee forum this week. We also thank all our special guests who sent messages of hope. And that's the final word that I'd like to leave you with tonight, hope. Not optimism, which can be just about focusing on the good, but hope, which is about recognising the struggles and sufferings of people, but not giving up and not giving in. For many of the refugees and people seeking asylum, facing the bleak realities of their situation and the situations of their families, it can be hard to hold on to hope in the uncertainties and the horror of their situations. We think of Ishmael still in detention after 9 years. We think of those like Moz and Farhad and even Zaki with no assurance of a place to call home. We think of the families separated with loved ones in places of persecution and suffering like Afghanistan. As Claire said, our challenge is to be their hope when they feel hopeless, to lend them our strength and to raise our voices on their behalf, to not be bystanders to their suffering, but to stand up for compassion and justice and changes of policy in our nation. In this time of pandemic, let us remember that hope too is contagious. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you at the Candlelight Vigil on Sunday night. God bless.